In even a common ordinary case of murder, the judge and defense both require precise and detailed information about the alleged murder weapon. If the detailed weapon is a pistol, for example, the court demands to know the make and model of the firearm, precisely how it was used to commit the crime, how the murderer used the weapon, and so forth. An expert witness will be called in to testify about the weapon. But in the case of what is supposed to be, or supposed to have been, the greatest crime of mass murder in history, this kind of precise information has never been demanded or presented. Instead of precision, there is complete confusion. It's important to realize that the Holocaust story we hear today differs in many significant ways from the story that was told at the Great Nuremberg trial and in the decade after the end of the Second World War. For example, we no longer, or only rarely, hear the stories told at Nuremberg of gassings at Dachau and Buchenwald, or stories about steaming or electrocuting masses of Jews, or stories about manufacturing bars of soap from the corpses of murdered Jews. To make a comparison, imagine a murder trial in which the prosecuting attorney argues vehemently and at great length that the defendant killed his neighbor in the kitchen with a shotgun, and to prove the case, the prosecution presents witnesses who swear that they saw the defendant commit the crime just that way. And then, after the trial drags on for a few months, the prosecuting attorney argues just as fervently that the defendant instead died in the basement of knife wounds, and presents witnesses who claim to have seen the accused commit the crime that way. And all this, even though no corpse has been found, much less examined, and no expert report has ever been made of the alleged murder weapon. And in addition, the prosecution makes no effort to explain the contradiction. Ladies and gentlemen, until early last year, our next speaker, like most Americans, basically accepted the Holocaust extermination story. That in itself may not seem remarkable, except that this man also happens to be the foremost American expert on gassing and gas chamber technology. He is Mr. Fred A. Leuchter, Jr., or as some pronounce it, Leuchter. A few weeks ago, he said to me on the phone, "You can call me Leuchter or Leuchter, just don't call me Letcher." Last February, Mr. Leuchter was commissioned by German-Canadian publisher Ernst Zundel to thoroughly investigate the alleged wartime gassing facilities in Poland for Zundel's defense case in the Holocaust trial in Toronto. No one is better qualified than this man to carry out this task. Fred Leuchter is the foremost American expert on the design and fabrication of gas chambers used to execute criminals in the United States. He has worked on and designed facilities used to kill condemned criminals with hydrogen cyanide gas, the same gas supposedly used by the Germans to kill millions of Jews at Auschwitz. Since 1980, he has been the only such consultant on the technology of killing people in gas chambers. At the end of February and early March last year, Leuchter led a team to Poland consisting of himself, his draftsman, a video cameraman, Jürgen Neumann, who, by the way, spoke at the last IHR conference, his wife, Carolyn, who served as a secretary and an interpreter. Leuchter and his team carefully investigated the so-called gas chambers at first, the Auschwitz main camp, second, the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, which was supposed to have been the most terrible Nazi extermination center, and third, the Majdanek camp near Lublin, where it was claimed at Nuremberg that 1.5 million people were killed. When Leuchter first appeared in the Toronto courtroom to testify in the Holocaust trial, the judge and the prosecution team seemed to panic. The prosecuting attorney tried hard to keep his testimony from being introduced, but Zundel and Leuchter had done their homework. Every aspect of the investigation at the Polish campsites is recorded on videotape, which Judge Thomas called, quote, a regular state production, unquote. Altogether, Zundel had to pay some $35,000 for Leuchter's testimony and report, including the cost of the team's trip to Poland. Zundel was so sure that the Holocaust story is a fraud that he sent Leuchter to Poland at great expense completely confident that an independent investigation would confirm the revisionist view. In his testimony to the court and in the report, Leuchter explained in detail that the alleged gas chambers at Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Majdanek could not possibly have been used to gas people. Leuchter's evidence, which was undoubtedly the most significant in the trial, has immeasurably strengthened the revisionist case. In his foreword to the report, Professor Forasson has said that the Holocaust gassing story died on the 20th of April, 1988, the day that Leuchter began his courtroom testimony. David Irving has called the Leuchter Report shattering and said that from now on no scholar will be able to look at the history of the Second World War without taking it into account. The report also impressed Canadian journal Doug Collins, who called it devastating. Our next speaker's investigation, testimony, and report demolishes the core of the Holocaust legend, the Auschwitz gassing story. So far, no one has tried to refute his report or findings. But ladies and gentlemen, this evidence cannot be ignored forever. It is already circulating widely around the world. The French edition of the Leuchter Report was sold in periodical shops throughout France, and the entire first German edition quickly sold out. A Portuguese edition has already been published, and editions in Italian, Dutch, Spanish, and Russian are expected soon. In Australia, 7,000 copies have been distributed to the media, political leaders, and so forth by the Australian Civil Liberties Union, which is headed by IHR editorial advisor John Bennett. The attractively printed new North American edition of the Leuchter Report, with an important foreword by Dr. Robert Forasson and several appendices, is available for sale from the Institute for Historical Review. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Leuchter received his bachelor's degree from Boston University in 1964 and did postgraduate study in celestial navigation mechanics at the Harvard-Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. From 1965 to 1970, he was the technical director for Northeast Aerial Photos in Boston, where he specialized in airborne, optoelectronic, and photographic surveillance equipment. He designed the first low-level color stereo mapping system for use in a helicopter, which has become an airborne standard. In 1970, our next speaker formed Celinav Industries Incorporated, a consulting firm. During his period with this firm, he designed and built the first electronic sextant and developed a unique, lightweight, compact, and inexpensive optical drum sector encoder for use with surveying and measuring instruments. He also built the first electronic sextant for the United States Navy and the first Moir fringe optical drum encoder for use in geodetic surveying instruments, satellites, altitude and azimuth devices, and measuring instrumentation. Mr. Leuchter has worked on and designed astro trackers utilized in the onboard guidance systems of ICBM missiles. Because of his work in navigational devices, he has had hands-on experience with surveying and geodetic measuring, equipment, and a thorough knowledge of map reading and cartography. He is trained in reading and interpreting aerial photographs. In addition, he designed a computerized transit for surveying use. During the past 10 years, Mr. Leuchter has been a consultant to several state governments on equipment used to execute convicted criminals, including hardware for execution by lethal injection, electrocution, gassing, and hanging. In the course of this work, he designed a new gas chamber for the state of Missouri, and he designed and constructed the first lethal injection machine in New Jersey. He has also been a consultant on execution procedures. Mr. Leuchter holds a research medical license from both state and federal governments, and he supplies the necessary drugs for use in execution support programs. In 1983, he formed American Engineering Incorporated with a partner who specialized in business management. While with this firm, Mr. Leuchter developed the first low-cost personal telephone monitor. In 1987, he formed Fred A. Leuchter Associates, a consulting engineering firm specializing in general consulting and on the design and construction of prototype hardware. He generally accepts projects having to do with electrical, optical, mechanical, navigational, and surveying problems. Mr. Leuchter holds patents in the fields of optics, navigation, encoding, geodetic surveying, and surveying instrumentation, including patents on sextants, surveying instruments, and optical instrument encoders. Mr. Leuchter has been a forensic engineer consultant and has testified as an expert in courts in the United States and Canada. He is the co-author of a scientific paper which was read at the 1980 annual conference of the Institute of Navigation at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Our next speaker is also an accomplished pianist and musician, as well as a certified small arms instructor and NRA expert marksman. This weekend we are also pleased to welcome his wife Carolyn, who is here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, please welcome a man whose work is a mighty blow for historical understanding, Mr. Fred Leuchter.
My paper is entitled The Leuchter Report, The How and the Why. In 1988 was a very informative and likewise disturbing year for me. I was appalled to learn that much of what I was taught in school about 20th century history and World War II is a myth, if not a lie. I was first amazed, then annoyed, and then aware that the myth of the Holocaust was dead. Like all American children born during and after World War II, I was taught about the genocide perpetrated by the Nazis on the Jews. By the time I had reached college, I had no reason to disbelieve any of my education, except that I had some problems swallowing the numbers of decedents, totaling better than 6 million persons.
Yeah.
But there it stopped. I believed in the Nazi genocide. I had no reason to disbelieve. Some 24 years later, a very believing engineer sat at his desk working on a snowy afternoon in 1988 when the telephone rang. This very believing engineer was about to receive a very shocking history lesson, one which would cause him to question that 50-year-old Holocaust lie and the application of that lie to generations of children. Hello, this is Robert Forreston. And that very believing engineer would believe no more. I have, for the past 9 years, worked with most, if not all, of the states in the United States having capital punishment. I design and manufacture execution equipment for all types, including electrocution systems, lethal injection equipment, gallows, and gas chamber hardware. I have consulted for or supplied equipment to most of the applicable states and the federal government. Because of my association with the states in this capacity, I was recommended as a consultant on gas chambers by Warden Bill Armentrout of the Missouri State Penitentiary. After answering my phone on that cold January afternoon, I met with Dr. Robert Forreston twice in Boston, and as a result of these meetings, I was summoned to Toronto to meet with Ernst Zundel, Attorney Douglas Christie, and the rest of Zundel's very able staff. Dr. Robert Forreston had postulated 13 years ago that a gas chamber specialist should be sought who could evaluate the alleged gas chambers in Poland and report on their efficacy for execution purposes. Something the revisionists already knew was impossible. Valentine's Day weekend found myself and Carolyn, my wife, of 2 weeks in Toronto. 2 days of lengthy meetings followed, during which I was shown photos of the alleged German gas chambers in Poland, German documents, and Allied aerial photographs. My examination of this material led me to question whether these alleged gas chambers were in fact execution facilities. I was asked if I would go to Poland and undertake a physical inspection and forensic analysis resulting in a written evaluation of these alleged execution gas chambers. Some at places I had never even heard of. After due consideration, I agreed and made plans to leave for Poland, awaiting a time of minimal snow covering. I also stated that although the photographs and documents seemed to support the view that these places were indeed not execution facilities, I would reserve final judgment until after my examination. And if I determined that these facilities were in fact or could have been execution chambers, I would state that in my report. The final report was to be utilized as evidence in Ernst Zundel's defense in his pending criminal trial at Toronto, and I had to be prepared to testify under oath. Preparations for the trip required me to take sample bags, documentation journals, and tools. Because we were in a communist country, I would have to be careful with the tools. Very few tourists carried hammers, chisels, star drills, and tape measures while traveling. I hid them in the lining of my valise and hoped for the best. Further, I had maps of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria, in the event that we might have to make a hasty and unscheduled exit. And finally, the gifts with which we bribed the museum people to supply us with copies of the documents from the museum archives. I was very fortunate to have a competent and dependable party of professionals. My wife, Carolyn, my general assistant. Mr. Howard Miller, my draftsman. Mr. Jürgen Neumann, my cinematographer. And Mr. Theodor Rudolph, my translator. All knowing that if caught, the Polish government would take a very dim view of our activities and purpose, let alone my removal of forensic samples from national shrines and monuments. And the two ex officio members of our party, Mr. Ernst Zundel and Dr. Robert Forrest, who for obvious reasons could not accompany us in person, but who nevertheless were with us every step of the way in spirit. On February 25th, 1988, we left for Poland. Neumann and Rudolph being the Canadian contingent, joining myself and the remainder of the American team in Frankfurt. We returned home on March 3rd, 1988. These are the chronicles of that trip. We arrived at Krakow in the late afternoon and spent our first night at the Hotel Orbis. We consumed the first of our 3 decent meals while in Poland. The following day, we drove to Auschwitz. We arrived at Auschwitz Hotel and were greeted by the smell of sulfur naphthol disinfectant, a smell I had not encountered for many years. The hotel was apparently the old officers' quarters for the camp. We ate lunch at the hotel dining room, a cafeteria-style facility. This was our first unidentifiable meal. A starch soup and sundries. We made a reconnaissance tour of the camp, lasting into the dim light of the Polish afternoon, and several snow squalls, a common occurrence. We ate no supper, in that we found no place to eat in Auschwitz after sundown on our first evening. The following day, we began our work in the alleged gas chamber at the Auschwitz facility. Unfortunately, we were unable to accomplish much due to the constant interruptions by both official and unofficial Sunday tours. Carolyn stood guard at one entrance and Theodore at the other, advising myself, Jürgen, and Howard of their arrival. It was too dangerous to take forensic samples and tape measure, so we left for Birkenau about noon. At Birkenau, we began a 4-hour walk into the damp Polish cold through snow squalls so dense we could not see each other at a distance of a few feet. Unfortunately, we did not expect to spend that much time walking through the camp, and that vehicles are not permitted within the camp. And we left Carolyn behind in the car. Since we forgot to leave her the keys, she nearly froze in the Polish afternoon. We visited the barracks, premise 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the sauna, and the alleged burning pits. We took samples, documented our activities on videotape and in still photos, and made scale drawings of these facilities, carefully documenting the removal locations of all of the forensic materials. We had to break into the sauna building, since it was locked. At Prema 2, I descended into the depths of the alleged gas chamber, a wet, dank, subterranean place not visited by man in almost 50 years, since the building had been reduced to rubble, probably by a German military demolition team. Fortunately, there were fewer guards and pedestrian traffic, making working conditions considerably better than they had been earlier at Auschwitz. Being somewhat smarter for our empty stomachs of the evening before, we found and ate at the restaurant at the bus station, the only legitimate restaurant in Auschwitz. We returned to the Auschwitz hotel for the night. The following day, Monday, we again began our work at Auschwitz, the Sunday tours being over. We were able to get our samples, tapes, and documentation. We had by this time obtained blueprints of the alleged gas chamber facility in question. We also verified the floor drain existence for the periods of the alleged gas chamber usage. Upon completion at Auschwitz, we drove again to Birkenau to take our control sample from delousing facility number 1. Unfortunately, this building was locked, and again we had to break and enter in order to access the delousing chamber. Again, we ate at the bus station and retired early to the Auschwitz hotel. On Tuesday morning, while awaiting Theodore's unsuccessful attempt to obtain a can of Zyklon V from the camp officials, Jürgen and I made a videotape of locations within the camp. We moved from the Auschwitz hotel to a hostel nearby, obtaining newly vacated rooms. Again, we ate at the bus station and retired early. On Wednesday morning, we ate a very enjoyable breakfast of ham, cheese, and bread, our second decent meal since we arrived in Poland. And we began our trip to Lublin to see my Donegal, With one final look at Auschwitz, we began our drive to Majdanek. Several hours later, we arrived at Majdanek, visited the museum, the reconstructed alleged gas chamber and crematory. We finally arrived at disinfection 1 and 2 and examined the facilities. It was extremely difficult to work here at Lublin, in that a guard made rounds every 10 or 15 minutes. The alleged gas chambers were blocked by gates and not accessible for a detailed inspection or by the general public. It was necessary to trespass beyond these gates in forbidden areas. Again, Carolyn and Theodore stood watch while I made measurements and did a detailed examination in these areas. Once we were caught short, and I was forced to hurdle the gate, and was still in the air in mid-jump when the guard entered. Fortunately, the guard was more interested in Jürgen and his video camera to notice me and my rather abrupt landing on the concrete floor. The camp closed early afternoon, and the guard rather nastily told us to leave. By 3 o'clock, we were en route to Warsaw, a trip which would take 5 hours through rain and snow. Our hotel reservation had been fouled up, and fortunately, with the help of an embassy official, we were able to secure rooms at another hotel. We had our third edible meal in Poland that evening, and went to bed in preparation for our trip home on Thursday. The following morning, we had breakfast and proceeded to the airport for a return trip. We boarded the Polish airline plane after clearing customs, my suitcase containing 20 pounds of the forbidden samples, fortunately which were not found. I did not breathe easy until we cleared the passport checkpoint at Frankfurt. Our team split at Frankfurt for return trips to the United States and Canada, respectively. Upon our return to the United States, I delivered the forensic samples to the test laboratory in Massachusetts. And upon receipt of the test results, I prepared my report, combining my knowledge of gas execution facilities and procedures with the research I had completed at crematories in the United States and with retort manufacturers, the results of which I believe you're all familiar with. Upon completion of my report, I testified at Toronto, but that is another story for another time. The findings, as I think everybody is familiar with now, and I assume everyone in the audience has either seen it, not is possessing their own copy of the report. But relative to the gas chambers and the crematories, I would like to discuss some of my findings at this point. What is important about this report are the results that were published. Categorically, none of the facilities examined at Auschwitz, Birkenau, or Lublin could have supported, or in fact did ever support, multiple executions utilizing hydrogen cyanide, carbon monoxide, or any other allegedly or factually lethal gas. Based upon very generous maximum usage rates for all the alleged gas chambers, totaling some 1,693 persons per week, and assuming these facilities could support gas executions, it would have required 68 years to execute the alleged number of 6 million persons. Promoting these facilities as being capable of effecting mass, multiple, or even singular executions is both ludicrous and insulting to every individual on this planet. Those who do promote this mistruth are negligent and irresponsible for not investigating these facilities early and ascertaining the truth before indoctrinating the world with what may have become the greatest propaganda ploy in history. Now the crematories. Of equal importance are their errors relating to the crematories. If these crematories operated at a theoretical rate of a maximum output per day without any downtime and at a constant pace, which is an impossible situation, we accept the figure of at least 6 million executed. Then the Third Reich lasted for the last 42 years. Since it would take 35 years at an impossible minimum to cremate these 6 million of souls. No one by any stretch of the imagination would allege or even believe that the Third Reich ever lasted for 75 or even 42 years. Yet they would have us believe that 6 million of souls were executed with equipment which could not possibly have functioned in 1/7 the absolute minimum time it could possibly have taken. Forensics. Forensic samples were taken from the visited sites. A control sample was removed from the delousing facility number 1 at Birkenau. It was postulated because of the high iron content of the building materials of these camps that the presence of hydrogen cyanide gas would result in a ferric ferrocyanide compound being formed as evidenced by the Prussian blue stain on the walls of the delousing facilities. A detailed analysis of the 32 samples taken at the Auschwitz-Birkenau complexes showed 1,050 milligrams per kilogram of cyanide and 6,170 milligrams per kilogram of iron. Higher iron results were found at all of the alleged gas chambers, but no significant cyanide traces. This finding would be impossible if these sites were exposed to hydrogen cyanide gas, since the alleged gas chambers supposedly were exposed to much greater quantities of gas than the delousing facility. Thus, chemical analysis further supports the fact that these facilities were never utilized as execution facilities. Construction. Construction of these facilities further shows that they were never used as gas chambers. None of the facilities were sealed or gasketed. No provision was ever made to prevent condensation of the gas on the walls, floor, or ceiling. No provision ever existed to exhaust the air-gas mixture from these buildings. No provision ever existed to introduce or distribute the gas throughout the chamber. No explosion-proof lighting existed, and no attempt was ever made to prevent gas from entering the crematories, even though the gas is highly explosive. No attempt was made to protect operating personnel from exposure to the gas or protect other non-participating persons from exposure. Specifically at Auschwitz, a floor drain in the alleged gas chamber was connected directly to the camp storm drain system. At my stomach, a depressed walkway around the alleged gas chambers would have collected gas seepage and resulted in a death trap for camp personnel. No exhaust stacks ever existed. Hydrogen cyanide gas is extremely dangerous and a lethal gas, and nowhere were there any provisions to affect any amount of safe handling. The chambers were too small to accommodate more than a small fraction of the alleged numbers. Plain and simple, these facilities could not have operated as execution gas chambers. Conclusion. After a thorough examination of the alleged execution facilities in Poland and their associated crematories, the only conclusion that can be arrived at by a rational, responsible person is the absurdity of the notion that any of these facilities were ever capable of or were utilized as execution gas chambers. I stand here before you at the 9th International Revisionist Conference, giving revisionists a report on my work in Poland, supplying them with information, and this information going to a very select group of professionals who already know and knew the answers before I began my report. I am an engineer and a scientist. I am not a revisionist. I was consulted to help Mr. Zundel in his trial. I did this. But because of what I have seen, I have a compelling urge and perhaps a responsibility to countless generations who come after me. A responsibility to the truth.
Yeah.
Because of this responsibility, I asked everyone here today to join me in formally calling the world scientific community, the world political community, and the world's historical community to join efforts to form an international commission of scientists, historians, and scholars to investigate the facilities in Poland and make an impartial report on their findings to the world at large. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I've lived up to your expectations, and I will entertain any questions.
Oh my. So we'll take questions now. If you would go to the microphone, please, to answer them, to ask the questions.
What caused the traces of the CN radical in the various crematoriums? Do you have any information on that?
I would guess that at some point these crematoria were fumigated. They were used at various times in history as hospitals. They were used as an area of bomb shelter. They were used for purposes other than, as we all know, execution facilities. They were essentially, and they were probably and most likely built as morgues. And I'm sure that periodically, as with all of the buildings at any of the facilities that we've looked at, there was extermination of vermin by novel pest control personnel.
Yes.
question the extermination of the 6 million, and I'm wondering how he could allow your testimony in the Zungo trial.
Well, that's exactly correct. He did state that the court was taking judicial notice of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
He also did not allow a copy of the report into evidence, although he did allow the district attorney to keep his copy of the report and ask me questions from it, which was clearly contrary to court procedure, both in the United States and Canada. But the fact is, he had to allow the testimony. And I testified to everything that was in the report. The testimony is on record. And there were many things that went into that testimony that are very beneficial to making a determination of whether or not these were actually gas chambers as far as the general public goes. Probably the most important is the fact that the court took judicial notice of the fact that you need 9 square feet to circulate the air in the chamber and the gas in the chamber. Without that 9 square feet, you cannot distribute the gas throughout the chamber, and as a result, you're going to kill very few people, assuming that's what you're using the facility for. Since the 9 square foot rule applies, that cuts the number of people that could be executed in a chamber at any one time down to something below 1/3 of the alleged numbers.